September of 1927 was no ordinary month for America's banks. In Madison, Wisconsin, a cocky young crook tried robbing the same bank 2 days in a row. In Chicago, Illinois, 6 masked men staged a violent daylight ambush that tied up traffic for blocks. Out in Kansas, a pair of brothers literally clawed their way out of jail. And down in New Orleans, a man in overalls strolled off with thousands of dollars, earning himself a nickname that no one would forget. If at first you don't succeed, rob again. Our first stop is Madison, Wisconsin. A young man named John R. McClintock thought he'd found the perfect target, the South Side State Bank. Well, his first attempt failed, but to his credit, he wasn't discouraged. He went back the very next day, successfully pulled off a heist, and walked out with $2,200. But it didn't take long for the law to close in. On the night of September 15th, McClintock returned to his old rooming house to grab some clothes. Now, he thought he was being clever. He circled the block to make sure that the coast was clear. However, inside, officers Carlson and Daw were waiting as they'd done for a handful of previous nights. When McClintock walked through the door, Carlson raised his riot gun and demanded to know who he was. Quote, "I'm a roomer here. Don't shoot. I am drunk," end quote. Carlson hesitated, and that was all that McClintock needed. So McClintock lunged, wrestling Carlson in a hand-to-hand battle that caused the riot gun to hit the floor. Dawes stepped in, scooped up the gun, and set it aside, and for reasons that I don't think we'll ever know, assumed that the fight was over. However, it was not. McClintock popped up, fists flying. In fact, one paper said he, quote, "bounced up like a rubber ball," end quote. Well, Carlson punched him in the face, and Dawes socked him between the eyes. And finally, the two officers managed to hold him down long enough to calm him down so they could call headquarters. When a doctor patched him up later, McClintock admitted, quote, "I deserve everything I got. I deserve more than what the officers gave me," end quote. And the courts agreed. Within 24 hours, McClintock pleaded guilty and was sentenced 15 to 25 years of hard labor at the Waupun prison. So he went from a successful stick-up man to wearing prison stripes within a week. Second City traffic snarl. While Madison, Wisconsin celebrated its quick arrest, Chicago, Illinois was dealing with a much bigger problem. One newspaper joked, quote, "Chicago banks employ policemen to direct traffic and to keep the burglars going out from colliding with the ones coming in," end quote. And it was funny only because it was true. On September 20th, 6 heavily armed men ambushed a messenger car from the First National Bank of Cicero, Illinois. Depending on the paper, they got away with $25,000, $44,000, or even $95,000. What is certain is the scene. The robbers forced the car over to the curb near a viaduct. They popped out with sawed-off shotguns in hand and masks on their faces. They threatened instant death to anyone who made a move. 4 men worked on scooping up all the loot, while 2 others stood guard, holding back motorists and pedestrians near a busy intersection. This was a daylight robbery, downtown Chicago, which snarled traffic for blocks. And yet, the bandits were gone in minutes, prompting, in part, by week's end, for the headlines to scream, "Crime Wave Sweeps Chicago." Turnabout is fair play. Meanwhile, out in Kansas, two brothers were building their own mini legend. Lawrence and Walter Turner from Wichita, Kansas, had recently knocked off the Isabel State Bank for a very modest $660 score. But their real claim to fame came when they landed in the Barber County Jail. Instead of accepting their fate and waiting for trial, they went to work on the wall of their cell, which was a 2.5-foot thick wall. And somehow, scrape by scrape, they carved out an escape portal and slipped away into the night. Not too many days later, they were arrested out in Phoenix, Arizona, alongside fellow escapee Clyde Pennington. Well, the Turners confessed freely to their deeds. And they even admitted to caching or storing up and hiding about $2,300 in traveler's checks, and even promised to show police where it was once they were back in Kansas. So by mid to late September, the brothers were extradited, tried, and sentenced, with both getting 10 to 21 years in the Lansing Penitentiary. So they went from successful robbers to jailbreakers to long-term convict residents of the Kansas State Penitentiary. Open and shut, and open again. While the Turners were being locked away, another drama was just unfolding, and this one with a twist of mistaken identity. In Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, police had arrested a man they believed to be Roy Dickerson, an Alabama convict who escaped the Kilby prison. Roy was notorious. Robberies in Tennessee, holdups down in Alabama, and there was even a story of him killing a military policeman during World War I. Well, the man who'd been caught was, not surprisingly, running with a bad crowd, and this included Leo Fowler, who was a former Detroit police officer who'd turned stick-up artist. When cornered, it took 3 officers in a blazing fistfight to bring Fowler down. So this seems like an open and shut case, except the prisoner wasn't Roy Dickerson, he was Ralph Dixon. Well, for weeks, the newspapers went back and forth. Was he Roy? Was he Ralph? Was he both? Finally, by late September, the truth was clear. It was bad guy Ralph Dixon, not notorious fiend Roy Dickerson. And Ralph's fate? He was sentenced 40 to 80 years for his own string of robberies. Overall, not too bad. Down south, New Orleans, Louisiana had its own character in the crime pages. A man in overalls walked into the Metairie branch of the Canal Bank and Trust. He pulled a gun and walked out with $3,000. He wasn't wearing a trench coat. He didn't brandish a Tommy gun. He didn't have a fedora pulled down over his eyes. He was simply wearing overalls. And of course, the papers loved it, instantly decreeing him the overall bandit. Well, police quickly suspected that the overall bandit was probably J.B. Willis. Willis was a 34-year-old former power line worker. He was arrested in Athens, Texas, after hopping a train out of Louisiana. Bank employees picked his photograph out of a lineup, though Willis, of course, denied everything. And whether he was guilty or not, the moniker stuck. In Brutal and Rich in Rich Hill. Our last stop takes us to Rich Hill, Missouri. On September 7th, a lone gunman stormed the Farmers and Merchants Bank. A cashier named Jones, RJ or RL, depending on the paper, hesitated when he was asked to open the safe. So naturally, the robber shot him in the stomach. While Jones lay bleeding, the bandit forced 2 other clerks to the floor. He looted somewhere between $5,000 and $6,000 and then locked everyone in the vault, wounded, possibly dying cashier included. Authorities believe that that same night, the robber kidnapped a taxi driver in Fort Scott, Kansas, and vanished out west. This was a brutal job. No glamour, no clever headlines, just violence leaving an open case file. September 1927's crime blotter saw persistence, brute force professionalism, some dumb luck, and murderous intentions. And while history doesn't always give us the complete answers we want, at least it does give us some kind of tantalizing stories. And we'll continue our September 1927 gangster stories next Saturday as we head west for a California crime wave, hit Tennessee and North Carolina for a couple of heists, and revisit the intriguing trial of America's #1 female robber, Rebecca Bradley Rogers.